Everyone, this is Krish. Hope you're doing well. In this video, I want to talk about the technology stack and what are some of the criteria that might play a role in you picking one for a new application that you start out to build. Let's say you're getting started on a new project and there is not a single line of code and you need to get started with building an application or a suite of applications, right? So how do you go about picking what to build it on, right? You have to make several decisions, right? But let's just focus on a few items here. One of the initial questions you'll ask yourself is, what language do I want to build this, right? Which framework do I want to use, and what libraries within that framework do I want to pick and choose? And it's not very easy, not necessarily easy. And now that in 2019, as years go by, there are a whole lot of options, right? There are so many languages, so many frameworks, so many libraries that it can honestly get overwhelming as to, okay, how do I want to go about doing something? And particularly in the world of JavaScript, there's like 50 different libraries you could theoretically use. Some are more popular than others, and some wane in popularity after you get started to work on them. But regardless, things constantly change. And how do you plan for that? You cannot plan for everything that changes, for any of it that changes, honestly. But as you do this long enough, you start having a set of hunches, and you could rely on them, right? It's just when you have some experience doing this repeatedly, you have a feel for, okay, you know what, this may work or this may not work, and that's very intangible. So I'm not going to speak about that part. But what is more tangible is, okay, so let's say you're building a single page app. You could go with any number of JavaScript front-end frameworks, say React or Angular or Ember or Backbone, which unfortunately is not as popular or as it was 2 years ago. It's waned quite a bit, even though I use and like that library. How do you pick which one to go with, right? And again, I don't know if there's necessarily a right and a wrong answer always. You just want to do your due diligence and go with one that makes the most sense in the context of your requirements and your team. Say your team has their skill sets in Angular versus React, then there is a good reason to go with Angular, right? So you may not want to pick a new framework altogether and have everyone go through the learning curve unless they actually want to, and it makes more business sense for you to do that. And if your team happens to have more experience in React, you're better off picking React as a framework, because today, as I speak, React has become more and more popular, more people adopting it. But that wasn't necessarily the case like 18 months or 12, 18 months ago, and we don't know what might happen like a year or two down the road. So while you always want to hire the best engineer for the job, which in my opinion, is a different topic, but it shouldn't be driven by the stack. It should be driven by their ability to solve complex engineering problems. So let's assume that you have a team of great engineers and folks who can pick up different languages and frameworks. So that's not necessarily a problem, but you still don't want to pick a stack that's totally unrelated to what your team is either working on currently or has had experience with, unless there is a good reason to move away from it. Right now, if you're working on a stack or technology from like 3 4 years ago, but people are not adopting it anymore, then there's a good reason to not go down that path. But I'm just talking about cases where the frameworks do exist and there is enough support. So you go to GitHub, you look at the stars and the Google Trends and figure out how many people have downloaded that in the last how many ever months, and you get some idea for the traction. So you have to make a choice, and you're going to have to live with it for a little while, because it's very difficult to switch frameworks. I mean, it's obviously possible, but it does cost a lot of time and money. It's like one of those things where you have database independence. Many years ago, when I used to exclusively write Java code, and you made decisions on, hey, let me not use database specific language when I'm implementing these middlewares, because tomorrow with JDBC you could pull the plug on one database provider and actually hook a different one. It's all great on paper, but in my career, I've probably seen it like once or twice, maybe, right? Where you have like a big installation, you build the schema for years or for long period of time, and then you switch gears from like Oracle to MySQL or vice versa or to Postgres. I mean, it's not as easy, right? It takes a lot of time and effort and money, and a lot of times it doesn't provide enough value to the table unless there's a cost related metric that's involved there, right? So why I say that is, before you pick something, make sure you do your due diligence, because whatever it is that you pick, you're going to be stuck with it for a little while, and that little while could become a long while, and it could be a separate migration exercise for you to go from one to the other. So we talked about React and Angular just from front end single page app frameworks. What about server side, right? You could go with, again, there's so many different options. You could be a Java shop, it could be a .NET shop, it could be a Ruby shop, it could be a JavaScript shop. So, and again, nowadays it's not one or the other. It's not even mutually exclusive. You're going to build a number of microservices. So each of them could be built in a completely different application to solve that problem the best way that it can solve that problem. So gone are the days when you're building one large monolithic application that does every single thing possible. So you definitely need to keep your mind open to be able to building these microservices in different languages and frameworks. But having said that, whatever it is that you go with, make sure you're comfortable with that choice, and you trust that it's going to solve that particular problem, not just today, but for months and maybe some years to come. Because the average life of a software product is like, say, 4 to 5 years. You want to make sure that your tools and the choices are at least good enough for that period of time, and then you, in your mind, reflected in some form of documentation that you reflect how you expect for this to change as the market changes, as the dynamics change, as more tools enter the marketplace. So it's going to be not super easy to change, but you're going to have to change. You couldn't build one and live with it for like 5-10 years. So you're going to have a migration path in mind. It's not a reactive thought. In my mind, migration is a proactive thought. Even when you build a brand new application from scratch on day one, you want to make sure you have some idea how you might have to migrate it. You might migrate only some parts and pieces of that application, maybe just the database, maybe just the middleware, maybe just the front end, or maybe you redo the whole thing. It doesn't matter. But you want to have some idea for, okay, how do I expect for this to sustain the next year, next 2 years, next 3 years, and what is the path forward from that point onwards, essentially. I know I started talking about one little thing, and I've touched on so many different areas, which is a problem. I'm just starting to do these videos, and I have to live and learn and try to know how to focus on just one thing, and just that one thing throughout the course of that video. But just when you start talking, I think about the repercussions of what I may have said like 2 minutes ago, and then I start going in a tangent. So apologies, but hopefully you learned something more than you already knew before you watch this video. Thanks.